Okay, so welcome everyone for our fifth e-learning capacity building seminar. And today is April 5th. And today's topic is reflections on administrative structures for online programs. And our speaker today is Dr. Stephen Gambesha. I'm not going to go through all of his credentials, but you can see clearly he has many credentials. And I'm just going to touch on a few things here, but in the course, you'll be able to click on more and learn more about Dr. Gambesha, because I've linked you to his entire bio. But Dr. Gambesha has held a range of academic administrative positions in 3 universities. These include Dean of Graduate and Professional Studies at Cabrini College in Radnor, PA, Assistant Dean at Goodwin College at Drexel University, Assistant Dean of Academic and Student Affairs at the College of Nursing and Health Professions at Drexel University, and Assistant Program Director at CNHP at Drexel, Assistant to the President for Strategic Initiatives, Assistant to the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Executive Director of Liberal Studies Division, and Executive Director of Continuing Professional Education at Newman College in Ashton, PA. In addition, he has served as Executive Director at an 8 college consortium. He is currently the director of the Doctor of Health Sciences program at Drexel University College of Nursing and Health Professions. This is a unique interprofessional doctorate program that marries leadership, interprofessional practice with education in both clinical and educational settings. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Dr. Gambesha.
Great, Fran, thank you for that introduction. And you'll take a look at this slide here, which would be a nice place to start. The first thing that I'd like to point out is something that was very helpful to me and when you're working in online teaching or distance learning, there's several terms that I'm sure you've used over the years, and we can explain them later. But one major paradigm shift that I'd like to start with is online learning, web-based learning is not content management. It's not content management, it's learning management. And I think that that is a significant paradigm concept to understand, because naturally, when you first learn about online learning, you think naturally in terms of content management, right? How do I get this stuff online? But it's really about learning management. So the content then could be secondary at times. So it's using this mode of instruction to manage the teaching learning process. And that's a shift. A second point is that if you're doing administration, especially a number of you are doing administration, and we'll talk about these different functions, you don't want to fall into this, what I think is a trap, a hole of having to defend that when you do online learning, it is as good as face-to-face learning, whether that's quality assurance, whether that's all that. That was a common mistake that we made when we first started online learning, is that we felt the burden was on us to prove to the faculty or somebody that it was just as good as. The reason is online learning, think about it, by its very design is different. De facto, it's different. Therefore, your assessments are different, your content is different, your pedagogy is different. So this notion that we have to compare it to be just as good as. Now, folks who attack it as suboptimal learning in the beginning, and some of you have lived through that. Some of you may have been people who have been converted. That assumption was, well, because it was different than face-to-face, it may be suboptimal. There's certain folks who will never get past that. We could talk about that a little bit later. So there are a couple of high-level concepts that we want to think about. This slide, I think, really sums up the functional areas that you'll be faced with. The one that we relate to immediately is, of course, pedagogy. We're teachers. In our heart and soul, we're instructors, we're faculty, and we're teaching. But there's also the hard technology piece of it. And then there's the instructional design piece of it. And then there's this administrative one. So look at this schematic and again, think about it. There's the pedagogy, which we're familiar with. We're teachers, we know how to teach. Our heart and soul is teaching, the art and science of teaching. When we move to online, it's not that we didn't do it face-to-face, we did, but that's something we were familiar with. When we moved online, there then became this, the technology piece. There was the hardware. We were already talking about bandwidth and things like that. And there's the hardware and technology people that rely on. But then there's this group of people, or the harder ones to understand, is these instructional designers. And this is where people like Fran and Dana come in, who know instructional design, and they can combine sort of the technology and the pedagogy together. That's a very different skill. Some of you may be those people, but you see the difference that you have. So if I looked at Fran for instructional design. I'm very confident with pedagogy. It's not that we don't talk to each other about pedagogy, but I oftentimes will go to her with instructional design issues. If it's a hard sort of nuts and bolts technology issue, we go to a different place. And then there's the administrative piece, the resources, people, the decision makers who are doing some of these administrative issues that kind of impact this. So looking at these four pieces, they're not necessarily linear. It's a confluence, right? It's this amalgamation that's going on. And when you start with an online program in a single department or across the university, you have these four, which appear to be silos, right? Working. Different people are working in them with different skills. Some people are able to cross over. They may know a lot about pedagogy, but they may be the assistant dean or the dean, which is very helpful. They understand that. They didn't leave that. Or they may come from the technology end and then learn more about instructional design. Or they come from the pedagogy end and take more of an interest in instructional design. So let me start there. Does that kind of resonate with what you're working with, and any comments you have on that? Some of the challenges, does that make sense, this rendition of how we're seeing this confluence or amalgamation of these very different functions?
And also how important it is that they're interconnected and perhaps overlapped, right? From that perspective.
Exactly. And another way to we're thinking about it is, if you were designing a work team, these would be the kind of the profiles of people that you would want on a work team, whether it's, again, at the department level, small level, and even at that broader college within a university or university level. You want to make sure that you have these folks. The reason why I want to bring it up too is when the administrators are hiring people, you have to have clear in your mind what type of person you're hiring for a particular position. And in the old days, it was easy. We had faculty. Okay, we hired faculty to do things. But when we started to move online, there was the technology piece, and then there was sort of this instructional design concept. So when you're talking to the technology people, they may not understand those instructional design things. And we do this intuitively when we walk into a classroom. If you use the model of walking into the classroom, we have the kind of desk, right? We have the whiteboards or blackboards. We have that environment of the system. And then we may have some tools that we use, way back in the old days, it was maybe those overheads. And then there was the 35mm slide projector, and now the LCD projector. So that was technology. Teaching teaching in and of itself is technology. People can think of the pedagogy in terms of the technology. So, again, why it's important to think about that is the folks who look at teaching don't necessarily pick up certain things that you would see from the pedagogy. A simple example I use is when I walk into a classroom, a teacher's immediately assessing that environment, aren't we? Where's my lectern? What are the windows doing? A simple example I use is if you have a window and the shade's broken, that's the kind of nuts and bolts of that classroom, right? Well, you couldn't expect a facilities person to have to walk in there. They kind of know the shade's broken, and maybe it's an administrative issue because they didn't have the resources to fix the shade. But you as a teacher know that if that shade's broken and I have to show a screen and that light comes in that window, you see, the students can't see the image on the screen because of the glare. These are the things that in our minds that we're trying to be attentive to, and becomes these aha moments when we're working interprofessionally, when these job things are working differently in terms of the technology of online that become important. We're just kind of translating what we're doing in the classroom. I'm just using that as an example to what we're going to be faced with in terms of technology. And when all these parts are working, it's just really wonderful. We've been fortunate at Drexel to have people who are skilled in these areas. Drexel, our college, was probably the front runner in terms of Drexel, the College of Nursing and Health Professions, a front runner in online learning. I got involved in it in the mid 1990s, so was involved in it pretty early on, and tried to keep up with the online learning. The administrative issues are very important too. There's a lot of what's nice about what you're doing if you're starting this is a lot has been learned since those years. A lot of things, even something such as how do we compensate instructors? So I don't know if you've talked about that. Have you talked about compensating instructors who design programs? Is that a question any of you have as administrators? What's a fair wage for hiring folks? Anybody interested in that or faced with, what do I pay?
They're all nodding. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is what I find particularly, we haven't gotten into talking about the money. One of the things that we're looking at next week is to look at, proposals, for moving forward. But I really like the analogy you gave, Stephen, about how to assess the environment from the lens of all these different special interests, or silos, you referred to them before, but they should be really communicating, with each other, but that idea of assessing the online classroom from those perspectives is so important.
Yes. And in the article that we wrote, and we did a study, Dr. Paolucci and I did this study, and we asked the question of the study was this, is we were hearing a lot about reading the literature. We were reading the strategic literature, and it seemed as if we weren't sure where exactly were these online programs being housed. That's the question we have. Where are they housed? If you listen to the marketing folks, they made it seem as if they were housed in these special online colleges that were these silos that were running it. And that's where you saw that pie in the article where we examined. But what we learned was that they were still generally housed in the academic units. The marketing folks made it believe that you would, to be successful, because you always have to watch the marketing literature, because what marketing and the consultants are doing is they're saying, get on board. This is what was happening. Get on board. You're going to be left behind. This is the new wave. And we learned that they actually were housed more in the academic units. Now, there were downsides to academic units because they usually move slowly, not as quick as, let's say, a separate continuing education unit or the online school. So there was multiple models used by colleges and universities. But the take-home message for our article still was that you have to still have high fidelity with the academic enterprise, that you want academic integrity. So you as the academic folks or the academic folks still have to be the sort of the oversight and the gatekeeper of the quality assurance, because in time, what can happen is some of the other things can slip, whether it's the resources or the instructional technology. And when we did another article where we looked at how were online programs being advertised, we were shocked, really. Actually, we were embarrassed for some of the ways that they were being advertised, because what we were selling for online learning was the notion that it was quick and it was easy, or that, you know, you could do this in your pajamas, or you can do this in your living room. I mean, we had ads. We didn't, I could show you something if we were doing something different, but you saw the commentary we wrote was the academic people have to look at the way that this is being sold, even though the marketing people say, well, people want to know benefits. We want to be able to say you can learn an online, but boy, what a disaster that becomes when you have to teach people. You have to sit there and be the one teaching someone, and they find out this is a lot harder than I think. One of the most egregious examples we saw was an image. In fact, when I had to research it and call the university up, we didn't list their names, and they were grateful to that, but they were embarrassed and apologized for such an ad. They actually showed a woman who was at a coffee table. Envision this ad. She was at a coffee table working on her computer. And then in the background, faded out, was a young girl, a toddler on, let's say, a train or something, like a little toy train. And they had her fade out. And the message was something along the lines of, you can learn online on your time. And I looked at that, we just shook our head and said, boy, this is an odd message. It almost is like, you know, ignore your children and you can learn online and get your degree. It was really a very odd degree. So you want to look at those ads of how your online program is being marketed, and don't hesitate to either the image or the words to speak up and say, this is not really the message that we want to portray. It's a kind of a dynamic, a delicate balance that you have with marketing people. It's not that you're being dismissive of their talents, because to some extent, the marketing folks may be looking at us as these aloof academics, right? You know, what do they know about marketing? And that's fair. They have skills just like we have skills, but a lot of it's back to the image that you're going to want to present. So you want to take a look at that. That's this administrative that's part of that you have in the resources.
That's the marketing piece of it is an important dimension in a competitive environment, which is what is happening in Cameroon as well. Would everybody agree? What are some of the considerations or things that have been happening from a marketing perspective in Cameroon?
Oh,
I would say
Jim,
that in
you're on, there you
Cameroon,
go.
There we go. Got it.
okay.
I don't have a lot of experience in the Cameroonian at the ground, granular level, but there are a couple of things. One is, I would say, as far as the academics don't know anything about marketing, I'd say a lot of times the marketing people have no idea about the product. Okay, and so I think
Right.
that arrow should point both directions.
Absolutely. Good.
They have to
good.
educate each other. The other thing is, we're starting in Cameroon at a much, much lower level, both in terms of faculty capability and experience, and in terms of the level of capability and access that we may have on the student side. And so I think one of the things that I'd like to hear about, and I think would be useful for our faculty and our administrators here, is kind of how you build up some momentum for something like this. I don't know whether a lot of schools are ready to go entirely or to entirely online programs or whatever else. But yet you can use online components, even in face-to-face classes. You can do blended things. You know, what's the best way to sort of sneak up on this kind of thing? The other thing is, now I know in the US, and I'm from Temple University, you know, we just required our students, everybody has to have a laptop with a movie camera, and it's got to have all these things. We haven't, I don't think, been able to really make that a requirement in a lot of places in Cameroon. It just simply, it's both economically and physically impossible in some cases. So the question becomes, where in this do we kind of look at the issue of, if you will, real capability in terms of making sure that it matches up with what we're actually doing? And who in this line of, from instructional design over to pedagogy, should be the people looking at that, or is it something we do together? How do we solve that problem? Because this is the thing that I've had experience with, is that when you start something like this, you find the variation both across faculty in terms of what they've had experience with, and students in terms of both experience and technology available, is really broad. The differences are pretty stark.
Right.
So
Yes, and what's good about it, Jim, is there's a lot of things that we've cycled through, so that's good. So people have gone through some of these. They may not be an exact fit for what is happening in the universities there in your country. You know what, at a fundamental level, you want an advocate in each one of these silos. There's no question you have an advocate. But here's something that would be useful, is when you look at this 1/3 rule, you will get a certain percentage, whether it's 1/3 or whatever, you will get a percentage of people who are just never going to come over to this is valuable online. They're just not going to like it. And then you're going to have people who are early converters, Jim, and it's not related to age. In fact, some of the early converters when I was working at Newman College was people who were close to retirement age. It's not necessarily age specific. It's something that just they get excited about and they want to do it. Then you have the folks that you're converting over, which will take time. So that's one way. If I was an administrator, at any level they were administrating, I wouldn't, you're not going to convert certain people, nor should you. If a faculty member doesn't want to teach online, the last thing we would want to do is to force them to teach online. It just doesn't make sense. And some schools have done that. They took more of a cavalier approach to it, saying we're going to be doing this. Now, in fairness, not all department heads would have the luxury of that, that, but in concept is you don't want to, you wouldn't want to force someone to teach. And some faculty, you don't want them teaching online. They're just not good at it. It's just, if you have the luxury of respecting that, that would be fine. And they will come forward in terms of that. So we learned that. In terms of how you get people interested, the way that it evolved in higher ed in the States, I think this is fair. You see what Fran thinks, is that faculty saw it as faculty development, not compensation. So they embraced it as learning something new. And then they weren't even getting paid with some schools in the beginning. So when you get into the payment end, they weren't getting paid. They were using it as service. So they developed things as service. Then over time, what started to happen, then there was this cycle, it was short, where we actually overpaid people to do it. In other words, it was kind of like hazard pay. We're going to pay you more to teach online because it's harder. You also had you want to watch out for, some people think it's easier. So we cycled through an idea where this is when I was assistant dean at Goodwin. I was hearing faculty say, oh, you could just throw more the advisors, throw more students in there because I'm teaching online. They actually thought it was easier when it wasn't. So this notion that online learning is time saving when you're teaching, that was a fallacy, right, Fana? That just didn't, this takes time, it takes effort.
Right. And that's the thing though, what we have here in currently is that many faculty in Cameroon are teaching online because remote teaching is necessary. So similar to what we've experienced here in the States with the COVID, that, you know, we've had to shift our perspective, you know, so that's hastened things a bit. And I see Dr. Veronica has a comment, but I just want to finish this. It's hastened it, and it's opened up the door for opportunity. And that's the piece that you sort of touched on, and Jim touched on, was about, you know, what are the pieces we want to keep? How can we take a step-by-step approach to moving forward in consideration with all these aspects here? I want to give the microphone to Dr. Veronica. She's got her hand up. I think she has a comment to contribute. So you have to unmute yourself though. Okay, go ahead. And we're not hearing you, Dr. Veronica.
Not hearing.
No, we're not hearing her at all.
Just at the point, Cameroon sometimes at different levels, the way the curriculum has to be covered and the content of the curriculum is a little different. In the universities, major outline is given, and the teacher or the lecturer has the responsibility to develop that content and to deal with it the way that lecturer wants. But some other time, that content is detailed for you to cover that particular specific content. And sometimes those contents are large, and the methodology of teaching has to, because we know that certain coverage, for example, the lecture method as again online teaching we trying to articulate now, it will think then it would take more time, like the previous I was saying, it would take really a very long time. Even some administrators to accept that. And again, there's that connection, what the curriculum that specified in some countries, Cameroon being a good example, what the content of curriculum is and what the job market requires out there. The knowledge that you acquire in the classroom and skills you're supposed to exhibit or portray out there in the job market. There is still that discussion as far as Cameroon is. On that is correlated, we see that the teacher is, you know, the teacher lecturers need a lot of help for new ideas, new practices like the online learning that we're on it now. And even the part of students themselves, they at least ready for such things. And so we need to really push and to push hard. It's a good thing that we're talking about this, and some of the administrators who are supposed to be, you know, push things forward, may be part of this idea. On so it will need hands on deck to be able to push it to the end. It's a difficult thing. We acknowledge that the online learning is time consuming. In Cameroon, we still have prescribed textbooks, for example, where the lecturers go to class and say, this is the textbook we're using for this course. And anything out of the textbook is like trying to step on somebody's toe. And so it makes it very difficult. in a bit, I'm just appreciating that this one is sources from all over the place, from internet, from all sources to put together to make it easier, better for the learner. Thank you.
Yeah, I was getting, I think I got most of that. It was breaking up a little bit, Dr. Veronica's, so it was a little bit harder. And, but some of it too will be back to, you know, just explaining to faculty, a lot of this is just going back to their instincts. You know, people are educators at heart and they have good instincts when it comes to that. And they'll see things and they'll know when the right time is, they can move forward with something. Or a lot of this too is what we find with in a department, faculty may be doing things differently in terms of instructional design, but getting to the same outcome in terms of learner objectives. You know, your simple example is, do I set up my weeks in the way I set up my folders? Do I set them by weeks? Do I set them up by modules? Some of those are just going to be not right or wrong, but preferences of how you're working with the technology. And yeah, go ahead, Fran.
I was just going to jump in. I was going to say, I think one of the things that Dr. Veronica did say was really the significance of all of these factors that you've identified here and how they need to be interconnected to help define what the curricular vision is, which is that academic mindset, and how that's then pushed out to the community, which includes the students, but also the employers, right? Because I got kind of that sense from what Dr. Veronica was saying, is that there has to be this coordination to really move the needle, move it forward, so that even though people may be reluctant. Dr. Veronica, did we hit that, what you were saying?
Yes, I think that is it. That coordination is needed.
So you're,
And
so if we
Steve,
were going, go ahead, Dana. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Steve. Hi. And something I think I picked up from what Dr. Veronica was saying, and again, it was a little hard because she was coming in and out, but she was saying things like, you know, there's something that's accepted in the culture of your educational institution. Like, this is the way we do it. So as leaders, right, as administrators, you have to be really clear about what your plan is, because I'm looking at what Charles had put in the text about, you know, you need to have a plan, you need to have some allocated like time and effort and money, but your faculty need to understand what that vision is before they're going to be willing to travel with you. And that can be a little difficult, especially with those people who are hesitant to jump into online. Even now that we have to, they still aren't really, like, they're not 100% all in, and that can be really hard.
Right. Yeah, again, when you go back to the instincts, you're going to find that some of the faculty are just naturally they're going to cycle through practices that you see as a more experienced instructor, but they just kind of have to cycle through it because it's in time they will get it. There's so much you can do in terms of the teaching of it. So two examples I would give is when you see faculty first taking on online learning, the discussion board, they give a lot of discussion boards and then find out in a short amount of time, my gosh, there's no time to grade all this. That's one. The other one I saw is the common one is the links, where faculty spend a lot of time doing links to resources, which seems on the surface to be good, but students only have so much time. So tying those concepts together is you're right, your content and your population will dictate how much you're doing online, even if you're doing anything online. In other words, what type of student you have. To this day, I still find, this is a good example, that the traditional age undergrad, the younger undergrad does not have the skill and tolerance level as an adult degree completer for that first degree. So I don't know if some of you had that experience. So I did spend a lot of time in working with the adult student who were finishing their degree. They moved quicker. They were just a different learner. And sometimes even when we're reading the literature, we have to keep that in mind. Who is the actual, yes, there's the curriculum and the program, but it's the type of learner. For example, our Masters of Health Administration, we don't take students who are right out of their undergrad program. They have the admission is a minimum 3, but the majority of students coming in have 5 to 8 years experience. So to mix them in with other students, a decisions that's made is we didn't think that would be helpful. There's some argument that mixing is useful, but to leave it at that as an example would be there. So that's going to drive it. And the other thing I would say is, you have these shifts of another paradigm shift. Some faculty get unnerved that, my gosh, the students could be emailing me, they could be at me at any time of day, 24/7. But a shift is, well, you could be at them any time of day, right? And any day, 24/7. So what I found in teaching face-to-face and online is, when I'm doing a face-to-face course, there are times where I say, oh, wow, it would be so neat if I was doing this online. There's times when I'm online where I'm saying, oh, wow, if I was face-to-face, I could do this better. So it's not it's not an either or. It's not that bifurcation as much as some pros and cons of each one of them and trying to balance which one makes sense in terms of what you're going to be working with.
Stephen, I think there was one other thing I heard in Dr. Veronica's comment that I think is worth mentioning here, because it's something that perhaps in our world we don't really think about, and that is that they don't answer just to the administration of the school. In countries like Cameroon, the Ministry of Education is much more involved in what's going on, and we can't just decide to do something that the ministry has either prescribed or proscribed. Okay.
Yeah, right.
And so that's one of the things we had, that's a sort of an additional, if you will, layer of complexity here is, what can we take online? If there are certain things within the rules that say this is the way you're going to do it, as she said, you've got this book and on Wednesday you're going to be on this page.
Yeah.
Those are
Yes.
things that we have to think about here, and we may have to pick and choose some things that we have the latitude to actually take online, where other things we may not. So that's another thing that would need to be worked out here. But that's a negotiation to me between
Right.
the administration and the Ministry of Education. Okay, it's not necessarily faculty resistance. It's a question of saying, let's figure out among the things that we have some flexibility on from the ministry, what of those things best goes online.
Right. You're right. When I read the article, I picked up on that, Jim, exactly that.
Okay.
It was, you have a different system. You have more of a governmental, and
Yeah.
it's changed there. The language that I find useful is that you're using quality assurance, that everybody, regardless of the number of stakeholders. So we have stakeholders and we have quality assurance. There's a schematic that I could send, Fran, I could send to you. It's an article that we wrote about that the quality assurance, what we forget sometimes is there's multiple stakeholders, and each of these stakeholders have power. They just have different types of power. So oftentimes, if we use the US system, we bow down to the accreditors who come, right? We get nervous and the knees are knocking and we're all nervous about the accreditors. But the stakeholders are also the companies are going to hire our students. The stakeholders are the accreditors. They're also the professional associations. So in the country of Cameroon, how are your professional associations can be advocates? And then there's the individual person. So I'll send a schematic that when we look at quality assurance, there's actually power among all of them. All of them have influence. And some of them are stronger depending on the time. So the concept would be, how can we, ideally, we're aligning everybody to quality assurance within that. That's very unusual. And the more stakeholders you have, the schematic I have has a number of them. And then in the middle is always the student. We're going back to the student. An expression that somebody said today, we were interviewing for a position of a headmaster, and that person who was interviewing used an interesting term. He says, I'm very focused on teaching the students that are in front of me today. I'm thinking, wow, we can't lose sight of that. We're back to the student. And a lot of what we do in professional training is that individual person in credentialing. So they're the focus, but around them are these stakeholders. So you probably have some examples where a government entity doesn't align with the professional association, who may not align with the accrediting body, and then the employers. And we could have a whole discussion of in the States what we deal with, the employers saying, are we getting what we think we're getting when you send the students into the workplace, the skills and what have you. So that there's another confluence of power, not in a negative term. I want to use the term influence. They can influence. And sometimes we may give up influence and say, well, they said, I like to tease our schools of business. And Jim, if you were at Temple, you can relate to this. Business has one accreditor. Well, our college health has like 12 of them. And they're always knocking, they go crazy over their credit and make a big deal. And our dean shakes her head and says, we have 12 of these people rolling through. And what we found interesting about business, because I'm in a health admin department, is they always want to have this heavy reach, this strong reach to say, oh, no, you can't do that. Well, and they kind of use the accrediting agency as the rationale. And sometimes you could say, well, I don't know, I think we can do this. So it's finding that influence. And of course, you're doing that in a diplomatic and an effective way, right? The adage, sometimes it's more important to be effective than to be right. You want to be effective too. And sure, you want to give this certain amount of deference to those folks who have some influence. But that's a good point of identifying those stakeholders and what we can do.
Fran, isn't it your comment, proceed until apprehended?
My motto, which is
yeah, right. So maybe we should
apprehended.
use that here.
Yeah. I saw Cheryl put what's interesting too is Cheryl put in the chat the idea of a vision. What I say about visions is, you get the job, so you're interviewing for the head. Let's say you're interviewing for the head of online learning, and you get the job and you impressed everybody with your vision. And no sooner are you in the job that everybody's coming to you trying to change the vision. You're saying, well, wait a minute, I'm going with this vision because it got me the job. And it's not that we're not open to ideas, but and in fairness, sometimes what happens is schools aren't successful because their vision is being kind of jerked around a little bit. Marketing people, I always feel for them, because oftentimes, every time you have a change in administration, the poor marketing folks are left with the different logo, brand, vision. Here's what we're doing. And they don't have the time to measure things that worked or did not work. So I feel for them. The marketing people are going to be very important in this too. And you want to have a good relationship with them. Take them out to lunch. You want to be friendly, and they're important people.
I was wondering to the participants, how ready do you feel the ministry is to either legitimize or endorse online learning at this time? Have you seen a shift? I kind of got a feeling from the article written by the professor at University of Buya that maybe the time is ripe for pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
There has been this perception in higher education that the ministry or the government does not approve of online learning or online education. And I think that many people have that perception. And I used to have the same perception too, until I actually went into some of their guidelines and saw that they did not disapprove of online education. they just had more restrictions on how it should be implemented. So there is that perception that government doesn't want this. So the institutions have also not been committed to online education. And I think.
Well, I was going to say, sometimes a crisis situation opens windows that previously had been closed. You might say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? And the crisis in Southwest Cameroon, from both the civil unrest issues and then the pandemic adding on, has created an environment in which the former doesn't ways of doing things don't work as well. So we take advantage of that and scoot through the opening that the opportunity that the crisis has presented.
Yes, sure. The government has actually asked schools to go online and to be ready to go online. They have actually asked that as part of their COVID control measures. So it comes down to the institutions to take this and transform it into, well, it's a vision, but to transform it into a project for their institution. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of support from the state in terms of resources, material or financial resources to help institutions make this transition or incorporate this. But they have what is a positive side to the way the government works in Cameroon is that they tell you go ahead and they don't give you any money. But if you are ready to do it, I think you keep on going until they tell you, hey, stop. And that's one of the things that the institutions are not taking advantage of. And then most institutions have people in administration who do not get familiarized with the text from this, especially from the ministry. So you find an administrator who just believes that, hey, we can't do online education, it's not allowed. He has not consulted the text from the ministry. Maybe he just called somebody in the Ministry of Higher Education, which has over 1,000 staff.
Yes.
You call anybody and they say, they don't know what you're talking about. They are not in that department. And they tell you, oh, no, there's nothing like that. And then you come back to school and you say, hey, I just called the ministry and there's nothing like this. So these are some of the issues that the administrators have to deal with if they want to push online education forward within their institutions.
All right. That's right. You point out what are called, that's the conventional thinking, right, Michaela, is conventional. What's conventionally known may not be actually what's true in terms of a policy. And that's very, that's good foresight to be able to say, I'm going to go back and see exactly what the wording is there. And they may be missing something in terms of that. And that's true of even small government entities. They don't have to be large to get really exactly. I used to have a position when I was assistant dean. I called myself the department of can't never. Whenever someone said we can't do this, I would go to work and say, oh, let's find out. I mean, maybe we can do it. You don't want to do something that's unorthodox, or you don't want to do something that does violate the policy. But oftentimes, and this is where your good administrators are going to help. You want to find that administrator who's going to get the answer and just search it down and see exactly what's taking place related to that. So that was a good point in terms of what's actually happening. Anything else there you could go there?
Yep, I think, and something to add to the point Cheryl raised about a critical vision, a shared vision. It's also a key thing for administrators here to reflect on, because if you talk to many people, for some reason, higher education liberation in Cameroon, which is about almost 18 years old today, rather brought in a lot of competition as opposed to collaboration.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that competition has made most institutions, especially in the private sector, to be more focused on getting as many students as they can, as opposed to any other thing. So there are issues about quality, there are issues about making investments in areas that may not necessarily look profitable in the short term or medium term, but strengthen the institution's capacity to excel in the long term. So administrators will not do that. They will not look at those things. They will not invest in those areas because there is this strong competition to get as many students as possible and to outsmart or to beat the others. So that affects how much can really be done in terms of a vision that you slowly translate into a project with phases, with the critical investments necessary. So that is one of the things that I don't know how we are going to deal with that, but it's a huge, huge obstacle towards visions like this.
That is so important. And I see Ado made a comment in the text chat about it's, the perception of that it's credible, that the education is credible. So it's really about the outcomes too, right? So having the outcomes that make you the best pick for, students and recruiting them. I think that that's very important. And I like the term about pursuing the vision and making it a reality may be the way to look at it. So it's pursuing your vision, identifying what that is, and then working towards making it a reality. I think it's an important aspect to that. So thank you, Ado. That's a very important point that you're making.
Yeah, the idea that online learning is suboptimal learning, there's no doubt we have some of that still in the United States. What really was helpful is sort of the epiphany that I saw was, if you really think about it, that the people who have eyes on my course, my online course, are actually more than have eyes on me in the classroom. So you could be teaching for years, and how many, unless in higher ed, there's not too many people who go waltzing through your classroom. Our department chair, if I would take as an example, department chairs, some of them spend time in there. It depends on the department. But as soon as we got into online learning, there were instructional designers in there. The department chairs had access. People like Fran and Dana may have access to our courses. We have back-end people have access. And then you're putting TAs in. And then something really exciting happened, which is team teaching. Team teaching now, of course, it takes more resources, but I would say one of the most rich faculty development experiences I have had were not from faculty development courses per se. It was from team teaching with another faculty member. And with junior faculty or visiting faculty, we realized that I came experience where we had this visiting professor who was working with me in the honors college. And it appeared to him that I was a better reference for him than people in his own school because I saw him teaching more. You wouldn't think that would be the case. So it's very enriching to do some team teaching. So you may be able to combine people. Now there's a clunkiness to it when you're team teaching in a course, but what I do is I point that out to students. So right now I'm teaching a residency course with 2 other faculty, but boy, is that enriching to be able to team teach. And even face-to-face team teaching is wonderful. Yeah. And the resources issues, I think you're right. You want to keep advocating for that. And you'll go through some cycling things too, because you will find like the experience about paying faculty. Some colleges in the beginning did have to pay faculty more to teach a course. But over time that was removed. Sometime there was a period where schools were charging students more Remember that frame with the technology? But over time, they said, well, that's not necessary anymore. We don't have to give them an extra fee. So we're going to cycle through that. Good administrators will not exploit people.
Mhm.
You want to give people in life, you're just back to the ethics, you give people their just desserts, and you don't want to be in the business of exploiting it. A good administrator will have their eye on what it takes there. But it was a cycling where initially it went through, the front runners were people who did it for faculty development. Then in time, we got to sort out the right compensation for it. I don't know where you are in that, but I have an opinion on what that should be, but I'll reserve that till, because that may not be as relevant now.
Well, maybe something that we may want to pursue. I see we've got 3 minutes left for our hour. It generates some interesting discussion and questions, more questions than we have answers right now. But I do think that there is some value in pursuing this line of inquiry and chatting about it in our discussion forum this week, identifying, what are the aspects to look at. I think payment, salaries for faculty is an important component of any purposeful, comprehensive endeavor to move forward, and is part of the conversation. What else is needed? What else should we be considering? Who else needs to be brought into the fold?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things, to discuss and to formulate before venturing forward. Any final comments or questions that anybody has before we wrap this up?
Fran, just a couple of things that I think are interesting that to connect a few dots. One is, we talked about this whole idea of actually being able to demonstrate the value of online learning. And this takes us back to last week. We were talking about quality assurance and making sure that we had outcome metrics and that we're measuring those things so that we can actually say, look, we're doing online education, but our outcome metrics are either at or better than what they were before. So that's one thing that's important. Stephen, you talked about team teaching. One of the things that I use online learning for a lot is bringing the outside in. And that is, you have access to anybody you can get on Zoom or whatever else, and you bring them in. So it's not just another teacher standing next to you, it's somebody out there in the field or even a community of people out there. And I think it's really important to realize how valuable that is when you've got the capability, even in a face-to-face class, to bring people in and to make them that resource available to people. So those are just a couple of things that I think tie a lot of this sort of stuff together. And obviously, when we start talking about our quality metrics, we should use all those stakeholders that Stephen was talking about here. It shouldn't just be an internal set of measures, but measures that our clients, if you will, on the outside, because the whole idea is we can be convinced of the value of online learning, but if our clients are not convinced of it, you got an issue. So I think there are a lot of things that tie some other things that we've been talking about together around this.
Great.
Good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today, and thank you, Stephen, for facilitating this discussion. It's given us considerable food for thought. So everybody, thank you, and have a pleasant rest of the day.
Great. Nice meeting everybody. Thank you for the courage to teach, right? That's the good mantra. Thank you for the courage to teach.